Okay. And I guess we will go ahead and get started. So welcome to the ISD 191 Legislative Committee meeting. I am Scott Hume, interim chair of the committee, and today is Monday, October 19th. Joining me are fellow board director Eric Miller, and then Superintendent Teresa Battle, and then Aaron Tinklenberg and Lisa Ryder from the staff. So without further ado, we can get started. And Dr. Battle, I believe you maybe you have the agenda first. Eric, can you hear me okay? It says you're muted. There you are. All right. Thumbs up from Eric.
So I think numbers 2, 3, and 4 are somewhat related. So just to give an overview, AMSD sent out a survey for all board directors and members of AMSD to develop their legislative agenda. And so the 2021 session will convene on January 5th, 2021. And so I just wanted to share the areas that AMSD is asking us to weigh in on that could probably prompt some conversation from this committee. So they wanted to know our 3 top policy issues that we would like to submit as part of their platform. List top 3 funding issues that should be important, and list any particular mandates that we would like to see repealed. So Chair Alt and I actually thought about these. And so even though we don't always formally adopt, I don't know if we adopt AMSD, rather we might have some more specific items on our legislative platform. Just wanted to get that out as you know, January will be here very quickly before we know
Exactly.
it. And then the federal advocacy, what are some of the thoughts the committee is thinking about for federal advocacy goals?
Okay.
All in the light of COVID.
Right. And just so you're aware, and you probably know this, but this committee was new. It was only about 6 months old when you started. So even starting now puts us several months ahead of where we were even just 2 years ago. So this is a good conversation to start having. I think it was like March before we really had even a draft platform previously.
So it is on the retreat on the board planning document is the other connection I wanted to make to number 4. It is on, it was on the board planning document that possibly at a retreat, which has now been set November 18th. So that's next month. And so how did this legislative committee want to go forward with that conversation?
I think it would be good to start with what we're hearing from AMSD and probably also MSBA. And then also taking a look at what we put together as kind of our own platform 2 years ago. And you know, I always like to start with, has anything changed? I mean, obviously the whole world has changed in the last 2 years, but from our perspective in terms of things like funding priorities, how have things changed and what does our new reality look like in that regard? But I'd say those are the 3 things, and I haven't looked to see if MSBA has posted anything. Usually they're pretty well aligned with AMSD, so I would imagine this year that would be the same.
So we're hoping that by November 18th, we'll have first those agendas from AMSD as well as MSBA, and then to take a review of the previous 191 legislative platform. So,
Great.
Okay. Director Miller, anything?
I'm sorry, what was that? I agree.
Anything? Okay.
No, I'm on board. Go ahead.
And then I don't know if Lisa had anything she wanted to state about the state bonding and state funding cycles, what she's hearing from her end about some of the platforms.
I haven't seen any platforms yet, but you know, I think our biggest question from a finance perspective is the formula increase or what to expect. And our special education is concerning with COVID this year because it may result in many districts not meeting maintenance of effort and how that gets managed at the state level. So that could be a policy as well as a funding. Because, for instance, if you don't run routes that are serving special education students because you're in more distance learning than you are in person, you're clearly not going to have those expenditures. And that means your cost for transportation is going to decrease. And you may not meet the same level of maintenance that you had the year before. So, for instance, our transportation cost for special ed is $4 million. It's 50% of our total transportation cost. So if all of a sudden we're not spending 1.5 mil, that means you're not making maintenance of effort because you're still got the same number of students, special ed wise, enrolled. And so that's a concern. Will they find a waiver to be able to allow for that to be acceptable? Or will they instead look for that to be somehow, will it somehow impact us negatively? Because when you don't meet maintenance of effort, it means they take general fund dollars back. So that's our issue.
And I imagine that will be an issue, like I think you said,
Yeah,
across the state. It's certainly not just with us.
Correct. Yep. Yep. It's clearly not just us. Yep.
Right.
And then I do know the special session, let me see if I got it right. Representative, was it Dabney that introduced the bill about holding us whole as far as kindergarten enrollment? So that's a national trend as well as state, that many guardians, parents chose that they didn't want this to be their kindergartner's first experience in school in a COVID environment. So
was that proposal just for kindergarten funding? Wasn't okay. I wasn't clear if it was for kindergarten or all grades.
I think I have to read a little bit more. So it was just introduced at last Monday session.
Okay.
Yeah. So AMSD sent it out. So I have to look at that also. So there are little things coming out as far as legislative related to COVID that may impact, of course, the upcoming year, such as the kindergarten enrollment when it comes to per pupil. It's like Lisa said, how are they going to manage all of this? And then what's our perspective on it?
Right. And I think there's at least one more special session between now and the end of the year. Might be two, actually, because I think they're every 30 days.
Yeah. So that would be, I think that may be something we want to bring forward as we get these little pieces to just share. This is what some people are thinking about as far as legislatures, what they're thinking about.
Right.
Okay. So do we have another, I think we have another meeting before that November 18th retreat, or do we? So we can prepare kind of materials.
It might be that week. Usually we meet on the third Monday. So
okay.
The 18th is Wednesday. So we would have one, if we kept our normal schedule, we'd have one on Monday, the 16th.
Okay.
So that'd be right before the retreat.
Okay. So I think that's a plan going forward. We'll bring the materials, AMSD if we have it, in MSBA platforms, other information we have that's coming out, and then we'll have it ready for the retreat. And copies of the last 191 legislative platform.
Right.
Okay. All right, so that was 2, 3, and 4.
Well, did we talk much about federal? We talked about
Oh.
state. 3 was federal.
Yeah, Lisa Federal, thank you.
So one of the things that we probably also need on our radar is the compensatory funding, because fall enrollment is impacted negatively across the state. And with the fall enrollment numbers being down, the free and reduced populations of those eligible and who have completed the current year's application becomes the basis of our compensatory formula for 2 years down the road. So we know that that statewide is going to be an issue for us as well, and is a concern. So there's some talk of having legislation that basically allows us to take the lower of either what was there last year or the current year. I should say the higher of the two. Yeah. So as far as federal is concerned, we have, are you talking about federal funding, or where do you want me to go with this?
The agenda
Yes.
item was identify federal advocacy goals.
I believe the federal advocacy goals are going to fall around our meals and what it is that the funding is. It's interesting. Julie and I were just talking last week. As she was headed out of town for the weekend, she wanted to share with me the fact that she's hearing something about the meals potentially being available beyond December free. And yet it's not official, and it's not anywhere that she can like point it out to me. It's more on like social media pieces. So we're unclear if something's still coming down the pike about that. That is something to be watching. We wonder if it's because of the timeline of people to fill out their free and reduced applications, and the fear that if they put it out there too much too soon, people may not complete that process. So it might be just a timing thing that there's something coming down the pike from the federal related to meals and how that's going to look for us for the rest of the school year. As far as special ed is concerned, that drives much of what we deal with at the state level, and so that carries forward. And I think that pretty well covers. I think that covers the federal side of things that I would be aware of. I think that's all I can think of at this point.
Okay.
So did you want that topic also at the November 18th retreat, the federal advocacy, and we will bring information, the latest that we have?
I think so.
Okay.
Well, Scott, I think one of the things we need to talk about too is when we originally laid this out, we kind of purposely avoided federal level advocacy from the committee, and we encouraged our members and everybody to maybe write letters or whatever. But so that's just, and I'm not saying that's a right or good or right answer. Just we probably need to talk about whether that's what the purpose of this committee should be based on what we think we can accomplish, et cetera. So
right.
I think that's part of the reason why it was on the agenda.
How much of an impact can we have at state versus federal? It's a good point.
So that might be a question at the retreat, but also in that time of COVID, is it something about the meals? Because I think we had some universal requests for us to move forward from their initial, that they were they weren't gonna allow the summer meal program initially. Remember when they switched it? That
Right.
was some advocacy. So that would be the only thing, just because it's unique to COVID.
Yep.
Mhm.
And I think given where we are right now, I imagine much of our work of this particular group over the next 6 months to a year is going to be very focused on, like everybody else, how do we rebuild and recover
Mhm.
and not lose everything that we've tried to build up over the last few years in the process. Yep. Okay, what's next?
Director Miller, you want to cover the last one, discuss the process for legislative exemption and committed funds?
Yeah. I was looking for, I had that agenda up, but now I can't seem to find where it was. Was it attached to Jamie's email originally? Anyway,
Oh, I'm not
doesn't-
sure.
so yeah, no, remind me so I had questioned why this was on there again. Let's go through that again.
So it was, so how do we structure the legislative exemption and subsequent commitment of funds to ensure that we don't lowball ourselves? So remember that example we had previously from the former district that received an exemption, they had a dollar amount. So in this market, it's hard for us in January, after the November election, to go to our representatives if we don't actually know an estimate. And so I think that was the question.
Right, and I kind of, I know Abigail suggested putting it in this committee. I don't know, other than the fact that we sort of front the conversations with the legislative contacts. I'm not 100% still sold that this is the right place to talk about this, but and so we don't have, I think we're missing some information, right? We don't know so the question is, again, how do we write up the request for the land, say, or the exemption, correct? And yeah, I don't know. Again, I'm not, Scott, what do you think? Do you think this is the right place to be talking about this, or should we have this at a workshop or something more appropriate to overall to the group?
Possibly, or we could draft something that we could review with a larger group, I guess. One thing I'm trying to recall is the legislators are the ones who actually write it, and they would have some experience in having done these in the past. How have they handled the dollar amount? I know we had that a couple of examples, but if we contact, I don't want to predict who's going to get elected at this point. If we contact legislator, state representative A, and they are willing to work with us to draft the legislation, like what does that process look like from their end? What do they need from us? Is there, I forget what the requirements were as far as, was it a set dollar amount, or was it something we could say all of the proceeds would go to? That's what I'm not struggling to remember right now. I thought we had talked about it could be left a little more open-ended as far as an exact dollar amount, but I could be misremembering.
Yeah, and Teresa, I know you and Abigail have been back and forth on this, but I thought we nailed that down. I thought that it was your initial opening bill, whatever you want to call it, is rather open-ended, in that we may be asked in committee testifying that to give some structure to it, but beyond that, these people are going to understand the market is what the market is. They're not going to
Right.
pigeonhole us into something just because we put the wrong number in a box or something.
So if I may,
Yep.
the example that we've provided in the past was a dollar amount that would be transferred from the debt service reserved funds to the general undesignated funds. And in that process, it did use a dollar amount. It's a very small district that had that, and so their amount may have looked small to us compared to what we're talking about. But I have heard that in our conversation with Senator Hall, as well as I'm sorry, it was Senator Gary Clausen. Sorry. When we spoke with him, he indicated that they have personnel to help us write that. I have since also heard from our legal, as we explore the, this is all about state legislation. So there's a whole federal aspect of this also, that because we have bonds that are tax exempt bonds, and depending upon who it is, and if they're a private company or whether they are a government entity, that means different things from a federal level. So just like you have your state taxes, you have your federal taxes. And so what we're talking about in this legislation would address the state side of things, but we also need to be making sure that whatever we're drafting there, we understand the consequences given the circumstances of what it is that's in place before us at the time, of what impact that means to us on a federal level. So we have been cautioned about that, just to make sure that essentially, I think whatever we craft, we need to make sure we're running past our legal as well. They're accustomed to seeing this type of thing come through them. And whether it's Ellers that we spoke with at the time, or Martha Ingram of Kennedy and Graven, who works closely with Ellers on these types of things, they feel confident that they can assist in that process. And so it's just a matter of making sure we don't forget to loop them in and make sure that that's kind of thought through.
That makes sense.
So going through
My suggestion would be that we just, I don't think there are parallel conversations that are going on with this vector battle. So I don't think it's appropriate for this committee to make any kind of decisions, but we will be happy to do some of the more finite work when it comes time to actually craft the request and work with, if there needs to be, say, a board level liaison with the leader of that effort at the state level, and maybe even federal, whatever that would land here. But until then, we don't have the answer to that immediate question relative to the what number to put on the request.
Mm-hmm. I think that was the request from the email. Okay. That was all.
Okay.
All right.
Well, if there's nothing else, then I guess we're adjourned.
All right.